Welcome back to another Health Hackers review. This one is all about the Hanu Health app, described by its creators as an all-day stress coach and a mental health therapist in your hand. The app tracks your heart rate variability and heart rate using a chest strap. It gives you personalized stress resiliency scores. These are meant to help you see how effectively your body is dealing with the stresses it's experiencing. And the app features breathing exercises designed to help you relax. As you'll come to discover, this is all about trying to train the nervous system and build better resiliency. Now, I don't consider myself a majorly stressed out individual, but I was open to taking a look at this app for the Health Hackers channel. Here's what arrived in the mail. You're looking at a Polar H10 heart rate monitor that I began wearing around my chest to get heart rate data in real time, and a QR code that I scanned with my phone to get set up with the Hanu app. It's worth pointing out that at the time of making this review video, the Hanu app is still in its relative infancy, so accessing it meant also installing the Test Flight app, which I learned is something provided by Apple to help developers allow users to test out early versions of new apps. When wearing the chest strap, I was able to watch my heart rate variability and heart rate in real time on the Hanu app. My understanding is those metrics contribute to what's called a stress resiliency score. You'll hear more on that coming up in my interview with Dr. Wiles. He's the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Hanu Health. Now, depending on what my stress resiliency score is in any given moment, the app can suggest that I consider doing an exercise. These are breathing exercises within the Train tab. There's also an Assessments tab where you can find out your resonance frequency and your BOLT score. I didn't know what they meant either, but you'll find out in my interview with Dr. J coming up. First though, 3 very quick but important points to make. Number 1, if you're new to the Health Hackers channel, hello, I'm Gemma, I'm a journalist. I make review videos about wellness innovations and I interview pioneering people in health. If you enjoy this video, I'd love it if you hit the like button or even subscribe and leave me a comment below. Number 2, I take pride in being transparent with you, so you should know that I was given access to the Hanu app and I was sent the wearable chest strap for free, which is why you saw the paid promotions notification at the beginning of this video. However, Hanu has not had editorial control over what I say about my experience with the app in this review. Please remember, my reviews represent good faith and honest opinion. I will be telling you what I like as well as what I don't like about the Hanu experience in this video. And number 3, anything on Health Hackers should not be considered personal or medical advice. Talk to your healthcare providers about you. I want to jump straight now into showing you my interview with Dr. Wiles. He's a clinical psychologist, the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Hanu Health. I began my interview with him by asking for his version of a really easy explanation of what heart rate variability is and why anyone should want to track and measure it.
Yeah, so heart rate variability is an interesting metric because it's become so ubiquitous, right? It's like a part of every single wearable, whether it's, an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch or Whoop or whatever kind of wearable you have. Almost everyone has HRV, but I would argue that it's one of the most misunderstood metrics on the market because there's a lot of confusion because HRV is one of those metrics where we are actually not comparing to anybody else. And that's different from a lot of the metrics that we're quite used to. So let me take a step back and just explain what heart rate variability is. I think a lot of people intuitively understand what heart rate is. So if you were to look at your Apple Watch or some other type of wearable, and you see your heart rate, you're going to get it in terms of beats per minute. So let's just use simple math and say you look at your heart rate and it says 60 beats per minute. Well, what that's saying is that on average, over the course of 60 seconds, your heartbeat was beating once every second. 60 beats per minute, 60 seconds in a minute, easy math. At first glance, that sounds like, yeah, that makes sense. So it was just beating once every second, when in fact, that's actually not what is happening. Indeed, your heart is actually speeding up and slowing down and speeding up and slowing down. And the primary driver behind that is our breathing. It's a process, a natural phenomena called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And when we inhale, the heart speeds up. And when we exhale, the heart slows down. So really what's happening is instead of your heart staying right at 60 beats per minute the whole time, it's actually more going down to 50 and then up to 70 and then down to 50 and up to 70. So we see that kind of averages out to be 60 beats per minute. Now that's heart rate, but the main driver behind what's going on between those big peaks and valleys is a little thing called heart rate variability. And what that simply is looking at, it is a metric that is looking at the dynamic shifts that is occurring in your nervous system. In other words, we're able to look to see how adaptive you are to stress at any given moment, depending on where we see that number shift. So you can think about it simply this way. If you inhale and your heart is speeding up, your heartbeats are getting closer to one another. They're kind of compacting in together. Whereas when you slow down and elongate your breathing, if you extend your exhalation, though the time in between heartbeats starts to widen out further. So heart rate variability is looking at in between successive heartbeats, what is the change that is occurring? And the more we see change occurring in that moment, the more adaptable we know that our nervous system is, or more resilient our nervous system is to all of the processes that are occurring in any given moment. If I even had to put it more simple, HRV is a good metric or representation of how adapted we are to stress in any given moment within that context. And as we see it go up, we know that our relaxation response is really starting to kick in. We're getting really good variability. And as it goes down lower and lower and lower, we know that our body's having a harder time adapting to stress. And so that would be seen as something that we would want to manage or self-regulate so that we don't have kind of that really, really sharpened decrease in HRV. If there's anything there that was confusing, let me know and I'll unpack it further.
I was thinking while you were talking how brilliantly explanatory that is for me to understand. But one thing I wonder is what factors cause somebody to have low HRV in the first place?
Yeah. One of the interesting things about HRV that I'm asked is probably asked most frequently is like, what do I do about my, quote unquote, low HRV? What I always tell people is that it is indeed possible to have a low HRV, but the way that we think about this is not low comparative to anyone else. It would be low relative to yourself. The reason I say this again is because there are so many factors or variables that are feeding into what is the main contributor of heart rate variability. Let me give you some examples. First and foremost, we know that there is a huge genetic component. The research is very clear. When you look at familial studies or twin studies, we see that people who are genetically linked by their DNA to one another tend to have pretty close HRVs, regardless of their health status. So I think a lot of times there's a bit of a myth that the higher the HRV, the more like fit somebody is, or cardiorespiratory fitness is higher. That's actually not true, because what we've actually seen is that there can be individuals that, let's say, they're family members, so share a lot of the same genetic makeup, where their baseline HRV actually is quite the same, close to one another, but their health status may be complete opposites from one another, whereas one may be extremely healthy and have, let's say, an HRV of 50. The other is not super healthy, super stressed, and they also have an HRV of 50. This is why it becomes so confusing, because people, I think, want to use it as like a health stat when really it's not. So I would say genetics is one, and of course we can unpack that. But also too, there are other variables that contribute to HRV that I consider outside of our control. So like height, for instance, I'm 6'5". So for me, we actually know that taller people have significantly higher HRV. It's just kind of a natural thing that happens. There's some potential theories behind that, but I tend to have a pretty naturally high HRV. We know that men typically have a slightly higher HRV than women do. So again, these are variables that we can't inherently change. So I always say, like, don't worry if you feel like you have a low HRV. Like if you're like, I look at my Aura Ring or my Hanu, and I'm in like the 40s or 30s, whereas like I see other people posting on Instagram where they're at 120, 130, 140. We have to remember that that is not kind of like some status of health that they have a higher HRV, simply because there's a lot of factors and variables that's contributing to that number. So instead of kind of just looking at like that one snapshot of HRV they may have, I try to take a much broader lens, and Hanu takes a much broader lens, so that we can look at heart rate variability change across time and within context, because for HRV, context is king.
So when I'm using Hanu, because I've been wearing it for a couple of weeks now, the chest strap and then monitoring my HRV on the app, I see those stress resiliency scores from moment to moment. And I'm wondering now, how is that calculated? Because if HRV isn't something that you would compare mine to other people's, if it's basically compared to my own biometrics, how is the stress resiliency score calculated for me when I'm using Hanu?
Yeah, this is a great question. So yes, you are correct that that number has nothing to do with a normative based comparison. In other words, in less scientific talk, that number has nothing to do with other people and where you quote unquote should be. Because again, in the HRV space, there is no number you should be. There's no bracket. So you know how like with blood pressure, it's like we want to have a certain limit. So if you go 130 over 80, you're considered hypertensive. So there's nothing like that. There's no classification system for HRV. It's very different because it's very individual based and is always comparative to you and you alone. So what we found is that heart rate variability is very dynamic. So you might see while you're wearing Hanu, you might see it kind of really go up, really go down, really go up, really go down. And it may just be like, oh my goodness, what is this number trying to tell me? If you don't know what you're looking for in terms of heart rate variability trending and where it should be, it's just really confusing. So what the stress resiliency score is, it's a scaled system. So instead of being 0 to infinite, which is technically where HRV is, we scale the system 0 to 100. And what we're doing is we're looking at how stable is your heart rate variability across time compared to where you normally are. So we have kind of like these brackets. We know the longer you wear our device, we know, hey, here is where your upper shelf is, here's where your lower shelf is, and in between is kind of your normal range. We call that a baseline range. When you start to move downward towards your lower end, and especially when you dip below kind of your normal range, well, now we've got some really interesting information about your nervous system. It's telling us a lot about your adaptability, and more so that you're having a difficult time adapting. In other words, your stress response looks like it's being turned on. Whereas if you're going in the other direction and your number's going up to the upper shelf or the upper ceiling, or you're kind of going above it, well, now we know your relaxation response is really, really kicking into high gear. And you might see that when you're in a really comfortable position or place, when you're doing some biofeedback, meditation, whatever it may be. And so we're taking all of that information into consideration, and we're giving you a simple and easy to understand scale of 0 to 100, telling you, hey, this is kind of what we see within the context of your nervous system. It takes the guesswork out of having to interpret heart rate and heart rate variability, because most people will not know how to interpret that information. So we provide a broad stress resiliency score, which is telling you this is how your nervous system right now in this moment is adapting to its environment. In other words, this is how well your body is handling the stressors that it's experiencing.
The stress resiliency score that I get at the end of a day, so I guess it's a daily average, could I be getting mistaken lower daily average scores because I work out daily and therefore I have that natural, quite dramatic drop in HRV while I'm exercising?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So here's what we say about this. That overall score is really telling you how much of a hit your nervous system has taken. And what we know in terms of stress is that there are really good forms of stress we might refer to as hormetic stress or eustress, which actually works for us. But it doesn't mean that our nervous system is not experiencing significant impact during that time. We just know that when we're force functioning our nervous system to be pushed into high gear, then that is going to help us to repair back bigger, faster, stronger. We're not as worried about that level of stress. The stress we're worrying about are those things that compound throughout the day, most particularly psychological, relational, social, work-related stressors, financial stressors. As those pile up, we know that those can have a significant negative impact. So I tell people that if you want to get a true representation of overall stress resiliency, you can remove it and not work out with it on, even though it provides some really cool information while you're working out that not a lot of other devices do. However, if you were to work out with it on, the thing that you're still seeing is how much kind of taxation did your nervous system get and how much did you recover. So one thing I do a fair amount is I work out typically pretty early, like 6 a.m. I'll wear it during that time and then watch for about an hour afterwards, kind of how well does my nervous system recover. And I generally know that if my nervous system has not kind of come back, or my HRV has not come back to around baseline or where it was before working out, around an hour to an hour and a half after the workout, I know that I probably pushed it maybe a little bit too hard. I might have been overreaching, overtraining some. So you can attain good value from that. But to your point, the original question, yes, there is the potential that you might have scores at the end of the day that reflect maybe a little bit lower of kind of like the overall stress resiliency score if the workout is indeed included.
You mentioned earlier breathing and how we can help drive up our HRV with breathing, and the Hanu app has those breathing exercises. I've been trying them out. I love the fact that you can do one for just 60 seconds. You don't have to sit for 20 minutes. You can just do quick ones. What is the end goal for the Hanu user? For example, if I keep doing the breathing exercises, will I see a more permanent increase in my daily stress resiliency? And if so, how long could that take? And will my life be way better with a higher heart rate variability throughout the day, longer term?
Great question. What our trainings are based on is the field of psychophysiology or biofeedback. Biofeedback are evidence-based protocols that are used in order to demonstrate or help you provide feedback from your biology, which is why it's called biofeedback. For so many people, when they do, let's say, a breathwork practice or a meditative practice, a lot of them get done and they say, yeah, like that was good. I think I'm feeling better. And that's good and all. We want that change in subjective experience. But one of the really cool things about biofeedback is that in real time, you're able to see the changes in your nervous system that are directly influenced by your changes in breathing. And when we see that, we tend to become more conditioned to come back for more, to practice, practice, practice. Just like many things in life, the more we put in the time to practice, I always tell people, it's kind of like going to the nervous system gym, right? When you go to the nervous system gym, which is biofeedback in our app, and you're training, what is it helping to do? It's helping to build better resiliency of your nervous system. The end goal would be that we're creating a more reflexive response of the nervous system. And what I mean by that is that it may be that right now, for many people who are watching this, that when they encounter a stressor, something that evokes a fair amount of anxiety, it may take their nervous system a while to calm down from it. For many people, we may not even be self-aware as to what's happening to our nervous system, which is why we think Hanu adds so much value. It aids in self-awareness as to the situations, circumstances, or events that impair our nervous system. But then what we really need to do is condition a new behavior, which is learning how to self-regulate. And so the more you're training self-regulation through these biofeedback or breathing protocols, the more we're going to reinforce that behavior to occur the next time you encounter stressors. So what we find so often, we see this in the scientific literature, but also for our users at Hanu, is that the more people train, they see that the events that maybe once caused them significant stress or anxiety in the past still might impact them and cause them a level of anxiety. We're not trying to eradicate stress to that extent. Stress is an inevitable part of life, but what they see is that they're much more adaptable. Their body just kicks into high gear and they can really handle those stressors in a much more efficient way and dial down the severity, dial down the duration because they've been training for it. It's kind of like muscle memory, right? If you're trying to learn free throws and you just sit there and you practice for 3 hours a day, every day, free throwing basketballs, you're going to get better at it and you're going to create muscle memory. We can do the same thing with our nervous system through this type of training.
So then would you say that the end goal for a Hanu user is to no longer be using Hanu because they've formed a habit whereby they feel stressed, they know to begin a breathing exercise?
Yeah, I would say that it's a horrible business model, but yes. Yeah. So the idea here is that we become our own biofeedback mechanism, which is a really cool thing. I think Hanu obviously still adds a lot of value because it serves as an accountability partner and you can kind of see kind of changes over time. But yes, I think one of the things that you do through this type of training is you do create and reinforce a behavior that becomes reflexive to the point where now you're operating as your own biofeedback trainer. The one cool thing that I've seen, and I've seen this happen clinically, which is I think one of the more fascinating things with Hanu, is that people will say, I used to like just get so caught up in my head, so caught up in the stress and anxiety that like I couldn't shake it, and it would just last and last and last. And then they say, well, I practiced and, I got better and better at this. And then all of a sudden I started looking back and noticing, oh my goodness, like, yeah, that was really stressful, but it didn't impact me. I kind of got through it. I reverted to kind of like a lot of the training. I slowed my breathing down without having to think much about it because, well, I've been training for this. I've been in the gym, the nervous system gym so often that the body just reverted to the thing that it knew was best for protecting itself during that anxiety, stress provoking time.
Mm-hmm. I saw on your website that Hanu should be giving me morning check-ins to track anxiety or depression levels. I don't seem to have that on my version. Is it a new update?
That's coming out here soon. Yeah. So we literally just updated our website, and the next rollout will have the morning check-ins. So basically what's going to happen is every single morning you'll have 4 questions. It's a part of the development app that I'm on right now. So I've been using it for some time, but our users will get the morning check-ins. One of the things that we're really doing for our app right now is that, when we came out to market last year, we really targeted a lot of the biohacking, health optimization, peak performance community, which was great at that time. It's a very, as you know, it's very data heavy, very tech savvy. But really at the heart of what Hanu is we're a mental health company. We're an emotional mental wellness company. So for us, we are really starting to kind of reshape the new design of our application to be more for those individuals who are struggling with anxiety and depression and stress. I mean, I think everybody could benefit from it in terms of just overall emotional well-being, stress resiliency, but we're really trying to massage and change some of those things to go out to a much broader market than just people who are like, I want data.
And with that data, to clarify, it's comparing me to me.
Always. The data is always comparing you to you.
A couple of things I don't quite understand, so I'd love to get your guidance on just briefly. The assessments tab in the app, there's a resonance frequency assessment and a BOLT score. So I did the resonance frequency and I got the BOLT score. It tells me what they are and what is being calculated, but as you said earlier, sometimes this can be quite confusing. So I don't fully understand what I would do with those resulting numbers and information, or is it more so for the app to use?
Yes, great question. A bit of both. So let's talk about both of those, the resonant frequency score, and then we'll talk about the BOLT score. Resonance frequency is kind of a complicated term for something that's not super complicated. So resonance frequency was a term that was coined by Dr. Paul Lehrer. He's a professor emeritus at Rutgers University, huge individual in the field of psychophysiology and biofeedback. And what he and his colleagues found is that everybody, and I should qualify, this is for adults, not for children, but all adults have what's called a resonance frequency rate of breathing. Now, what does resonance frequency mean? Frequency just means the frequency of breathing, the rate or pace of breathing. Resonance is referring to how that breathing pattern impacts your nervous system. When you do this assessment, what we are looking for is trying to find what is the ideal pace of breathing for maximizing heart rate variability within your nervous system. In other words, when we breathe at the most optimal pattern, we cause what is called resonance within the nervous system. Think about it this way. If you were to hold the violin in a way that isn't appropriate, and you strum the violin in a way that you shouldn't, it just makes a nasty screeching noise. It's awful. But if you hold it the right way and you have somebody who knows what they're doing, which is not me, and they strum it the right way, it makes this beautiful, reverberating, resonating sound. And so that is what we're trying to do with our nervous system. So when we found your resonant rate, do you remember what it was?
No, I don't.
So it's anywhere from 4.5 to 6.
I feel like I had a lot of them. Like it was almost a list of a few of them.
You will have the list and it will show you all the data, but one should have been highlighted and one should have been like prominent up at the top of the screen. And so, and you can go back to the assessments tab or the My Data tab and click on assessments and you can see it there. But what happens is we find your rate. It's anywhere from 4.5 to 6.5 breaths per minute. So let's just say it was 5 breaths per minute. Then when you go into our exercise tab and you click on resonance breathing, it auto populates for you to breathe at that rate of 5 breaths per minute. So you can train at your resonance rate that we found in the assessment right within the exercise tab. So that's just a great way. I tell people it's the easiest way to find, well, like I just want it kind of like done for me. Like what is my best rate of breathing or optimal rate of breathing? And then click the resonance breathing tab. It'll auto populate and you'll just breathe at that rate without having to mess with any of the settings. So that's what resonance rate is, or resonance frequency. Now, BOLT is a little bit different. That BOLT is an acronym, which is Body Oxygen Level Test. And that is essentially looking at overall CO2 tolerance and functional breathing. The whole point behind BOLT is to see whether or not there is a really high sensitivity to CO2, meaning that any type of CO2 pooling or holding of the breath, if it causes the nervous system basically to activate too fast, that can result in a lot of different things. One is especially things like anxiety. So when we see somebody, for instance, that has a BOLT score below 20, then we know that there is some signs of dysfunctional breathing. There's some signs that this individual is having a little bit of a difficulty with tolerance to CO2 that may be aiding in things like stress and anxiety. And so some of the work we'll do within the app, I mean, a lot of our therapists that we have with here at Hanu will work with people on really trying to create better functional breathing patterns so that CO2 isn't nearly as detrimental to that individual when it pools up as it will be kind of currently.
So breathing is so key with your app. Are there other ways that people can increase their heart rate variability?
100%. So we predominantly rely a lot on breathing, functional breathing practices and biofeedback. However, the next version of our app is going to be very heavy on that, plus meditative practices, mindfulness practices, non-sleep deep rest, yoga nidra. So those are all kind of have been demonstrated to shift the nervous system without having to focus solely on the type of breathing or breathing in and of itself, but are empirically or evidence-based practices. The other ways of doing it are increasing cardiorespiratory fitness. So we actually know that as someone increases their VO2 max, we will see an increase in heart rate variability. So that there is kind of a one-to-one with like level of fitness, so exercise fitness and HRV. It's just not nearly as strong as what people think it is, but we can see an increase there. You know, I think the biggest thing to remember is that HRV is just providing us insight into how the nervous system is responding. And I think that when people set out with a goal of like increasing HRV, it's probably not the right goal. I think what the right goal would be is saying, how can I gain better control over my nervous system? Because that's what holds the mental and physiological benefits. Because if we just set out with the goal of increasing HRV, we might do that in a couple of different ways. But I think the most efficient way is to increase our ability to self-regulate through all of the practices that I just mentioned, especially breathing being a predominant one.
How quickly could somebody learn to self-regulate their nervous system in an effective way?
Yeah. It really depends, because with individuals, let's say, who have experienced trauma, individuals who have significant clinical anxiety, it's a little bit harder sometimes to budge. And it's not saying it can't be budged, it's just more difficult. I mean, for instance, someone who's experienced trauma, their nervous system is always on hyper alert. It's hyper vigilant. It's dialed up. Fight or flight response is almost always kicked into high gear. So trying to down regulate that response can be a bit challenging. However, what we know, and this is not just me kind of spitting off Hanu information, it's me spitting off the scientific literature, is that individuals who are consistently practicing this type of work can see results in as little as 2 to 4 weeks and just changing our ability to self-regulate. However, we know that the longer and more consistent that we practice, just kind of like many things in life, we're going to see more resilience and ability to control the nervous system. So for me, I see it as kind of like, I view it the same way I view exercise and going to the gym. Like for me, that's kind of a lifelong thing that I'm always going to be doing. And I think that I've got to continue to train my nervous system the same way. So it's kind of a lifelong thing. Now, does that mean I need to like practice, 30, 40, 50 minutes a day, every single day? No, sometimes I just practice 5 or 10 minutes a day. Sometimes it's 2 minutes a day, but I'm really consistent with it.
So after that conversation with Dr. J, I felt like I had a better grasp of the data I'd been seeing on the app. I stopped wearing the heart monitor during my workouts because even though exercise is a good form of stress, I wanted the app to show me more of what you heard Dr. J refer to as a true representation of overall stress resiliency. Our chat also shifted my perspective on seeing low heart rate variability numbers within my data tracking because Dr. J highlighted the importance of context. The stress resiliency score is meant to be telling me how well my body is handling the stresses that I am experiencing. Now, after a total of about 3.5 weeks of using the Hanu app, I feel prepared to outline my likes and dislikes about the experience. We will start with my dislikes, but remember, this app is still in its early stages. If you're watching this at a later date, things may have changed and been updated. Firstly, I didn't fully understand the meaning of the data I was seeing when I started using Hanu, and I wasn't sure what conclusions I should be drawing from my heart rate variability and stress resiliency scores, let alone the BOLT score and resonance frequency numbers. When I interviewed Dr. J, things did make a little more sense, but even now, if I take a look at the data displayed within one of my completed breathing exercises, I don't know what these figures are or how I should interpret them. Next, this isn't Hanu's fault, but I just don't like wearing a chest strap. Maybe that's just me. Thirdly, dropouts in monitoring. I noticed the app wasn't always able to show me a look back at continuous heart tracking data. And initially, I guessed it may have been to do with dropouts in heart monitoring caused by sweat when working out. But there were times when I know I was wearing it, not working out, and there would still be some missing data. But I can't say whether that was because of the app or the heart rate monitor itself or something interfering from my clothing. My next dislike. I struggled to understand if a breathing exercise had worked. I emailed Dr. J, he responded saying, ideally, you would want to see an increase in HRV across the session. However, there will be times when you have an increase and then a decrease. It can happen to anyone. It does not equate to a lack of success. What we are most concerned with is the journey. Movement of HRV in the upward direction is great, as it is a sign that you are controlling the nervous system response. Well, I can tell you that I completed 19 breathing exercises, and of those, 9 showed an increase in my heart rate variability, while another 9 showed an increase and then a decrease in HRV, and 1 exercise showed no increase in HRV. My next dislike, again based around a little confusion, the app would notify me of moments when my heart rate variability dropped and prompt me to make a note of what it was that happened in those moments and state how I was feeling. It calls these moments life events. But what I found confusing was that if I logged that I was feeling good, the app labeled it with a green upward arrow, which seemed to me like an indication of an increase in stress resiliency, which felt contradictory to the drop in HRV. If you're still with me, I emailed Dr. J for some clarity. Within his response, he explained, the green arrow is a way of looking back over time at things that you deem as helping improve stress resiliency overall. Your metrics are still the primary mechanism for reflecting changes in the actual scores. My next dislike. In my interview with Dr. J, we touched on how quickly someone could learn to regulate their nervous system. He told me it depends, but that individuals who are consistently practicing this type of work can see results in as little as 2 to 4 weeks in just changing our ability to self-regulate. When I look at my daily stress resiliency scores over my 3.5 weeks, they have remained in the 60s and 70s throughout my trial. The maximum score is 100. I calculated my average stress resiliency score for the first 5 days of using Hanu. It was 70.4. And then worked out my average score for the most recent 5 days at the end of my trial. That came to 69.8. So from that alone, it looks like my stress resiliency got slightly worse. However, maybe I'm looking at this too simplistically and not considering other variables like the days in between those two snapshots. Perhaps those scores would look different if I'd used Hanu over a longer period of time or completed more breathing exercises for longer durations. I'm a toddler mum with limited spare time. Interestingly, when I wasn't wearing the chest strap, my daughter loved to mimic me by trying to wear it herself. And finally, this didn't bother me, but it's worth adding to this list of dislikes because it might affect you. The app right now is only supported on Apple devices. Now let's talk about my likes. Here are the things I have liked about the Hanu experience. To start with, the health enthusiast in me finds real-time heart rate and heart rate variability data quite intriguing. It's interesting to open up the app and witness what Dr. J described to me as how much of a hit your nervous system has taken. Next, I like that the breathing exercises can be as short as 1 minute long. You choose your durations, anywhere up to 30 minutes. I like that nearly half of my breathing exercises showed an increase in my heart rate variability by the end of the exercise. Equally, the same number showed an increase, then decrease in HRV, which Dr. J suggested should not be seen as a lack of success, adding that movement of HRV in the upward direction is a sign that you are controlling the nervous system response. Next, the initial app setup process was not problematic. The instruction videos were fairly concise and simple to follow. Also, the return policy specifies 30 days with no questions asked. My final like is that Dr. J seems genuinely passionate about Hanu. I get the impression this is his baby, also his authentic interest. You heard him say he's consistent with training his own nervous system, viewing it like a lifelong practice. For me, I'm relatively new to taking time during a day to intentionally focus on breathing and/or mindfulness. I've actually been practicing with a separate mindfulness app alongside trialing the Hanu app with the goal of being able to relax faster and let go of anxiety when it arises. My intention is to continue with training my nervous system in ways that feel right for me. Ultimately, I don't have an urge right now to continue using Hanu, but the app and Dr. J have brought me a greater awareness and understanding of how heart rate variability varies and served as a reminder to think about how I'm breathing in stressful moments. I want to mention cost before I go. At the time of recording this video, the Hanu website lists 12 months access to the app for $299. That works out at around $25 a month. It says the price drops to $19 a month after 1 year. That's not wildly out of line compared to some other devices that measure HRV like Whoop and the Oura Ring, but those wearables offer other features and data tracking too. I noticed Hanu's website also offers virtual therapy with therapists who are trained to use the Hanu software apparently, and the app seems to be free during the therapy period. Maybe with the guide of a therapist and using the app between therapy sessions, as is also mentioned on the website, the data experience might have made more sense to me from the very beginning. It's hard to say. If you have started using Hanu, I'd love to hear your thoughts on your experience. Let me know in the comments. That is it. Thank you for watching this episode. If you found it interesting or useful in any way, I would love it if you hit the like button or subscribe for more reviews and interviews. It means a lot when you support my work and give feedback in that way. Bye-bye.